I'm telling a series of stories that are some of the foundational experiences in my life, or the foundational people in my life, who have formed me, who have made me who I am. These are the Ebenezer stones, the significant stepping stones of my life and of my faith. And I'm telling these stories primarily for my daughters, so they have a sense of their heritage, where they've come from, and possibly where they're heading. Today's Mother's Day in the UK. We've just had a Mother's Day breakfast that the girls prepared, vegan pancakes for their mum. And I'm thinking today of my mum. I'm thinking of my mum who raised me, who's one of the real legacies, I guess, the legacy formers in my life. And my girls have grown up knowing my mum as Mimi. So I thought I would talk about their Mimi today. To paint a picture then, just very, very briefly. When I was young, I was a 2-year-old at this point, with my older brother who was a year older than me. We were being raised in Nigeria, where my parents were working. My sister was born there in Nigeria, a home birth. Very shortly after birth, got malaria very seriously and nearly died. My parents returned to the UK for a while, and then they drove back out to Nigeria in a Land Rover, and I shared that story earlier. And at that point, my younger brother had been born, so we were now 4 kids. We were 4 kids under 10, driving across the Sahara Desert to Nigeria, my mum homeschooling us. And it makes me recognise now, as I look back, that's a certain kind of person that can live a life like that. In those intervening years in the UK, before returning to Nigeria in the Land Rover, my mum lost her only sister, she lost her dad, and then she returned to the place where she'd nearly lost her baby daughter, where there were major challenges, because of the sense of call that she and my dad had on their life. And I recognise that there's a certain strength of character and fortitude in her that is amazing, and that my girls can be proud of and thankful for, and recognise that that sense of adventure, that sense of rising above challenges is part of who their Mimi is. Now, I wonder what made her that kind of person. And I realise, even thinking about it, that the answer is probably fairly obvious. She grew up in Asia. Her mum had lived in India. Her mother's family had lived in India for generations. My mum was raised in Asia with her dad working in the bank. And so she grew up an expatriate life in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in other parts of Asia. From a very early age, she was travelling on her own by aeroplane to Australia, to boarding school. So she grew up living in a country that wasn't her parents' passport nation. She was what we would now call a third culture kid. She grew up with her parents' culture, but she grew up in a culture that was a different culture. It wasn't her own culture. And she was different. She stood out. She grew up travelling. She grew up becoming independent, adventurous. She left Asia as a teenager to return to the UK and to settle into a country that was her passport nation, but it wasn't her home. Challenges that made her the adventurous person that she is today. I've got some abiding memories of my mum travelling around southern Africa with us when Kezi was a tiny toddler. I remember the 4 of us at that point travelled up to Namibia, long days driving, camping in the desert on the edge of the Namib desert. I remember one time we camped in the mountains, the Naukluft Mountains, and Kez was a tiny baby at that point. It was frosty, it was freezing at night, it was a beautiful scenery, and my mum just relishing in the adventure of this. I remember we visited Sossusvlei, the ancient sand dunes in the Namib desert. And some of these sand dunes are the oldest sand dunes in the world, very high, sort of 200-metre high sand dunes. And we saw one of these beautiful terracotta-coloured sand dunes. And we decided it would be great to climb to the top of this sand dune. If you've ever tried climbing a sand dune, it's absolutely exhausting. It looked easy, but literally every step you're taking forward, you slide back down. But somehow we managed to get to the top with Kez on my back as a little baby and helping my mum up this sand dune. I was honestly thought she was going to have a heart attack on the way up. She was absolutely exhausted. We got to the top and we sat on top of this sand dune, looking out at the stunning beauty of the Namib Desert. Memories like that, adventurous memories, that was my mum. And that is my mum. And I recognise today that even for my girls, that probably of all of their grandparents, in fact of all their relatives, my mum is probably the one that they would most identify with. Because my girls have also grown up as third culture kids. They've grown up in a nation, created a home in a nation which isn't their parents' home. They've then had to move away from South Africa, leave that home and come to another nation, to Spain, set up life in a new country, learn a new language, build new friendships, and all the time be going back to the UK to cousins and relatives. And it's their home, but it's not their home. Asking questions, who am I in this world? But growing up with a sense of adventure, growing up as a kid who's got more of a global mentality, I suppose. And I realise that they've actually got this from their gran, from Mimi. And even as I think about my mum, I recognise it was some of the challenges that she went through, some of the adversity that she went through that made her who she was, who she is. It's the challenges of growing up in different cultures. It's the challenge of travelling around the world on your own as a child. It's the challenge of losing relatives really early on. It's the challenge of raising a family and homeschooling them in a nation that's not your nation, with all of the challenges that brings. And I realised that challenges make the person. It's the adversity that created the character of my mum. And so I guess as I reflect on that today, and for my girls, I realise we're living in strange times. We're living at the moment, we're 1 week into this lockdown period, and challenges can have a different effect on us. We can try to survive the challenge, or we can actually ask as we go through the challenge, what is this doing to me? Who am I becoming as I go through this challenge? What do I want to take away from this? And so that's the question that I'm asking myself at the moment, and I'm asking my own girls as we go through this time. These hard times are not just to survive. These hard times are making us the people that we will be in the future.